Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who have not noticed, I am not here today. As I am not here today, but because we still have a lot of content to cover, we are doing a digital lesson, which means I have recorded the lesson, I've gone through examples and notes, and just like a normal class, and you're going to watch that now. The downside is that you can't ask questions. Please save your questions for tomorrow. I will be happy to answer as many questions as you have. Here's the downside. You're still responsible for this material. Made the video, covered the notes. I'm not reteaching it. I'll be happy to answer questions, but you need to take this seriously as if it were a class. As a heads up, there very well may be a pop quiz tomorrow over this material. Again, you are responsible for knowing this material. I will answer questions tomorrow. That being said, let's go ahead and get started. Today is 4/23/2013. This is Chapter 3, Unit 7. Chapter 5, Unit 7. 5, Unit 7. Awesome. And our objective, make it personal, I will be able to triangles. Just like we said yesterday, this is a topic that we're going to be working on for the rest of this week, is talking about triangles. Today we're going to be talking about congruent triangles. Congruent triangles. Congruent triangles, if we'll go back to our definition of congruent, means they have the same measure. So all corresponding angles and all corresponding sides are congruent, meaning they have the same measure. Congruent triangles are two triangles which every corresponding angle is congruent, has the same measure, and every corresponding side also has the same measure. The question is, what is a corresponding part? Corresponding parts. There are two ways to look at corresponding parts, and I've drawn some triangles to help us look at that. Here are two triangles. The first thing that I need to tell you for us to even try to put together corresponding parts is we got to know that they are congruent. Well, before we get to that, let's just talk about what it means to be corresponding. It means that I can take my one triangle, and corresponding parts are I can take that triangle and, in essence, lay it on top of the other triangle, and the parts that match up are corresponding. So, I took this triangle, I moved it over here. Corresponding is just the parts that match up. So this angle, this point, which was B over here, matches up with point F over here. C over here matches up with point E over here. Point A from over here matches up with point D from over here. Those are corresponding parts. This side, AB, matches up with AB from over here matches up with DF from over here. Segment BC from over here matches up with segment FE from over here. Remember, I just took this triangle and moved it over. So any parts that line up, that match, are corresponding parts. So if I wanted to list the parts that are corresponding parts, I would say angle A is corresponding to angle, that's supposed to be an angle side, D. That arrow, I don't know if that's the way I'm going to represent it. Angle A, angle D are corresponding. Angle B and angle F are corresponding. Angle C and angle E are corresponding. So are segments AB corresponds to DF. segment BC corresponds to segment FE. And segment AC corresponds to segment DE. So when I ask, here are two triangles, list the corresponding parts. Here's a cool part. So let's look at, I have another triangle and I'll explain this next. What I think is a cool part. Then again, I think math. Math is cool. If I tell you that, hey, these triangles are congruent. In other words, I'm going to tell you that triangle ABC is congruent, remember squiggly line over the equal sign, to triangle ZYX. Sorry, my bad. There we go. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle ZYX. Now I can take that corresponding parts one step further. Remember, let's go back. In order for those triangles to be congruent, every corresponding piece of them has to be congruent itself. We can work that backwards. We can say, hey, if the triangles are congruent, then every piece of those triangles is also congruent. So, two ways we can look at this. The first way is we can do what we did up here. We can say we've got triangle ABC, and I can flip that triangle and rotate it, or I guess it's just a rotation, there's no flipping involved, down here. So A and Z correspond, B and Y correspond, C and X correspond. And so I could go ahead and write that out as we said it. So angle A is congruent to angle Z. A and Z down here were corresponding. We said, hey, if we know the triangles are congruent, and we know that in order for them to be congruent, every corresponding piece has to be congruent, then we can work backwards and say, hey, if they're congruent, if the triangles are congruent, then the pieces are congruent. Just like to prove that they're congruent, we say, are the pieces congruent? Then if the pieces are all congruent, then the triangles are congruent. So we've got that. Angle A is congruent to angle Z. Angle B is congruent to angle Y. And angle C is congruent to angle X. Now, you can do it the way we originally did it, is just visualizing how would I have to rotate this, or flip it, or reflect it, or anything like that, and then which points line up, which points fall on top of the other points. And you can go by that. Here's another cool way that we can figure out what is corresponding. If we look up here, this is called our congruency statement. Just had a total mind blank. This is called our congruency statement, saying this triangle is congruent to this triangle. What this tells me is that the order is important when it comes to writing this, because telling me that this triangle is congruent to this triangle also tells me that this piece corresponds to and is congruent with this piece. This piece corresponds to and is congruent with this piece. And this piece corresponds to and is congruent to that piece. So easily I can see A and Z go together. Angle A is congruent to angle Z. Angle B and angle Y, angle B and angle Y, angle C and angle X. This also, I'm going to rewrite this so that we can see this again. So I'm going to move down a little bit. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle ZYX. Again, I haven't changed anything, I just rewrote it so that we can see it down here zoomed in. Just like we said the points correspond with each other the way they're written, so do the segments. Segment AB, segment ZY. The first two letters. Segment AB is congruent to segment ZY. If you'll look at your triangles, AB, ZY. Those are your corresponding sides. Corresponding parts are congruent. This BC, segment YX. Segment BC is congruent to segment YX. You can see this, BC, XY, YX. Those are the corresponding pieces. Last but not least, AC, ZX. Segment AC would be congruent to segment ZX. And there we go. There is listing all of the congruent pieces to the triangle. So, again, let's go back to our congruent triangles, our vocab. Corresponding parts are the parts that would match up. If one triangle was placed on another. So, in order for two triangles to be congruent, we have to look at all of the corresponding pieces and see, are all of the corresponding angles and all of the corresponding sides congruent? If I don't know that, if I don't have all of that information, I can't say definitively that the triangles are indeed congruent. That being said, if I do have that, then I can say that they are congruent. I can also work backwards and say that all corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. If the whole things are congruent, then all the pieces are congruent. We abbreviate that a lot of times by using the first letter, CPCTC. So when I say CPCTC, that just means that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are themselves congruent. CPCTC. Let's look at your homework real quick, or the worksheet. Okay, here's the worksheet that I want you guys to do for the rest of the class and to take home as homework if you don't finish in class. First two problems, I give you two triangles and I tell you they're congruent. I want you to identify all of the pairs of corresponding and congruent parts for each pair of congruent triangles. That's a tongue twister. I want you to do just what we did. Where's the paper? Right here. Corresponding triangles, I want you to list out all 6 of the corresponding pieces and tell me that they're congruent. For the next 6, I want you to look at it and see, do you have enough information to be able to say that yes, definitively, those two triangles are congruent? I want you to be able to say, are all of my okay, first question is which angles correspond with which other angles? So looking at it and saying, okay, this angle corresponds with this angle with this angle, this angle with this angle, then are they all congruent? Yes. This angle is congruent with this angle is congruent with this angle is congruent with this angle. Then looking at the sides. This side corresponds to this side corresponds to this side corresponds to this side. The way I know that is because I'm visualizing taking this top triangle and setting it on top of this triangle. The sides that match up, the angles that match up, are all correspond with each other. They're all congruent. So I know all of my corresponding parts are congruent, which means my two triangles are congruent. I need to write my congruency statement and say, well, triangle ACB is congruent to, and remember the order matters here because the way you write this triangle over here, the first letter has to correspond with the first letter of the other one. So this one is triangle DEF. There's a hint for you. Same over here. You need to find which pieces correspond. Are all 6 corresponding pieces congruent? If they are, write out your congruency statement. Make sure when you write out your congruency statement that the letters correspond with each other the way they're supposed to. Looking over here, follow that, etc., etc., etc. There's the first page. On the back page, I give you 2 triangles, and at the top I tell you that those 2 triangles are congruent. I want you to find the actual measures. So find Angle F corresponds to which of those three angles? If angle F is 110 degrees, then whichever one it corresponds with and is congruent to would also be 110 degrees. So fill in those measures as you go. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this helps. Again, the sub will be happy to provide the YouTube link for this, so that if you need to go home and rewatch this, you are welcome to. And if you need to fill in your notes, you're welcome to go home and rewatch this. See you all tomorrow, hopefully for a pop quiz in which you all do wonderful. Enjoy!